inference in terms of how we input and output information from these large language models or any other generative AI model. It is more expensive on a variable cost basis than anything we've ever done in computing. Relative to a simple Google search, doing a generative AI type output like ChatGPT could be anywhere from 10 to 100 times or more expensive than just a basic Google search, and that's something that companies are going to have to reckon with.
And shall we assume that those costs will come down?
Arms race right now is increasingly complicated in large models, so even as costs come down, the models are going to get more complicated. That will raise costs again. So this is always going to be more expensive on a variable cost basis than how we've done computing in the past.
All right, so let's say you're a large corporation or a mid-sized company and you see the potential for Gen AI in your company. You want to get engaged. But what do you need to know about what it is that you bring to the table to start thinking through these decisions, whether this technology would have value?
So there's 3 levels of increasing sophistication of how a company can get involved and really bring AI into their organization or their product. The most simple way of doing it is basically looking for the right applications that you can use in the market. Of course, ChatGPT has made its way into a lot of companies already, and that's not going to require a lot of deep thinking. But when we get to the next level of perhaps integrating a third-party application programming interface into your workflow, into your products, that's where you really got to think more about what are the ways that a custom integrated AI tool for your organization might be valuable. And so, for instance, consider the example of 2 retailers. So think about the department store, Macy's, or the supermarket, Kroger's. And so they might consider the possibility of using an API, an application programming interface from OpenAI or elsewhere, and then integrating that into their application so that their customers can have like a chat interface to learn about new products. Now, there's going to be a lot of potential for custom modifications at that level to tailor that AI for your particular customer base or organization. And so in the example I just gave, imagine if a customer typed in the word dressing into the chatbot. For Macy's and for Kroger's, they want the word dressing to deliver completely different responses. And so you'd need to modify the input, say prompt engineering, so that Macy's would want to append the word clothing in front of the word dressing, and Kroger's might want to append the word salad in front of the word dressing to make sure that the chat is giving the right kind of response. One level even deeper than the API is many companies, I think, are going to need to look at the serious possibility of putting together their own model. And that doesn't mean starting from scratch. It means taking an open source model that's out there that Facebook or others have already committed hundreds of millions of dollars to developing, and then using your own proprietary data to then fine-tune that model for your use case. So Bloomberg has trained a model already of their own, and what I want managers to know is that the barrier to entry to doing this is actually pretty attainable. The numbers I'm hearing from the marketplace right now, it could cost you $1 million or less. I've seen some people fine-tune models for under $1,000, and you can have a custom model that is based on your data for your organization. And that's going to depend on whether or not, A, you have the proprietary data, and B, whether or not a custom model for your specific vertical is going to dominate over the general one.
And then are you suggesting that companies could build these themselves, or how do you think through the buy versus build decision here, whether you develop in-house or partner with somebody else that has this know-how?
Yeah, well, fortunately, there's a lot of resources now that you can have your own model, but have other people help you put together that model. So for example, Amazon has something called SageMaker, where let's say you have your own data available. You can just give it to Amazon and they will fine-tune the model for you, and then boom, you've got your nice little custom model already. At the same time, of course, the larger your organization and the more specific tweaks that you're going to need to the model, then you're going to want to consider the possibility of bringing a lot more of this in-house. Of course, right now the talent in AI is very expensive, and so that's something we'll have to run into.
How do you even know who to partner with? I mean, suddenly there's a whole generative AI industry that's springing out. So, if you want to partner, who do you partner with? How do you trust the expertise? Figure out who's who and who's a valuable partner.
So there's 3 factors I would consider here. The first is your trust of that partner in terms of their ability to potentially handle your secure data. Whether or not you're going to give them all your data at once to build the model, or you're going to have your employees typing in potentially confidential stuff into an application. And I think the process for evaluating that trust and safety and security is the same process our enterprise CTOs have already been doing for 2 decades. Second part of this is simply just price. In that, in the longer term, I think a lot of the more general technologies we're going to be using are going to be fairly competitive in the market. And so, in the end, a lot of this is going to get driven down to just the variable cost of the cloud computing or computing technology. And so, I think price is actually surprisingly important here. And even across the big models that we've seen, like from Meta or from AI, actually, for most purposes, the difference in quality isn't that significant. So, in most cases, I would pick the one that was cheaper on a variable cost basis, especially. And then the third thing, and this is particularly important in today's environment, is that you really got to think about the stability of your partner and their financial viability. And so a decent amount of the AI companies we're talking about, the most well-funded ones, they raised a lot of their money before the current downturn in the market. And many of them are going to be struggling with their cash situation this year. I'm certain a number of them will not make it into next year. And so I would want to have a partner, provider, who I think will make it into the coming years.
When you talk about this, there are going to be a lot of, I guess, new job categories, new specializations. I mean, even when you say train the AI on the content, what does that mean in sort of layman's terms? What is the job of training an AI bot on a company's exclusive content or data?
Well, at least in today's world, and especially in the next couple of years, there's an increasing amount of tools that assist developers in doing the fine-tuning process. So I think in general, like any sort of back-end data engineer, software engineer would increasingly be comfortable doing this kind of thing, particularly as we are updating undergraduate and graduate education around this kind of technology. But what it does entail is, I would say, some hard factors and some soft factors. So in terms of hard factors, there are technical skills about how to run the model, and to, in particular, run the model efficiently when you're training it. I've heard stories of companies in Silicon Valley where some engineer made a very human mistake of typing a bracket instead of a colon or something, and then in the process of running the training, they literally just lit $500,000 of electricity and hardware on fire. Like, because they just started the process with the typo, and then now we've got a completely wasted training cycle. Now, I think the soft factors here are also important when you're fine-tuning, and this is something that I was really surprised about to see engineers doing this, but a lot of this training process is based on feel and intuition. And so what happens is that they will take data and then introduce it to the model to help regulate the parameters of the existing, say, open source model. And there isn't an obvious point where you want to stop the APOX or iteration analysis. And so what they're doing is they're feeling it out and eyeballing it and running there's some mathematical tests, but they're also just eyeballing the results that are coming out and then making a judgment call. Okay, have we trained this model enough? Do we have the data?
Interesting. So when you think about the org chart feature,
and let me tell you, right? If we think about this new job category of prompt engineers who specialize in interacting with AI, what are they doing? They're asking good questions, they're giving detailed instructions. What does a middle manager do? They're a prompter of humans. And so in that sense, like the skill set of a middle manager, I think is actually more and more important. And actually what I think is different here is as we contrast managers with, say, individual or independent contributors, I think it's actually the middle managers that are coming out ahead in that they're the ones that actually have the skill set that are to actually work with the AI, as opposed to someone who is, say, writing a contract or writing code as an independent contributor.
Yeah, so it's sort of all about the prompt. I mean, is that a burgeoning industry now? Chief prompt officer or something like that?
I think in the short term it's going to be quite important, and we're still early in how that's exactly going to be organized, but I do imagine that a significant amount of managers in companies are themselves, in addition to managing humans, going to have to be managing an AI. And in that case, those people I think will also have to develop the skill set of working with the AI and building that intuition over time. And I imagine the training for that would be a combination, like kind of how we teach business and management of humans today. It's a mix of a good HBR article plus like years of experience on the job, right?
All right, so let's say you're a technology provider. How would you be thinking about these markets right now?
Oh, this is a very tough one to look at right now as far as being a technology provider. But I think the upside is that there's a lot of places in the value chain here that you can compete in as a technology provider. You can compete in supplying data or you can compete in helping other people build models. There's also a burgeoning industry of going back to private data centers that I think we'll need more of. And of course, at the application layer, I think we will see a whole different category of applications that are going to be AI first. And then that's the area where I think we're going to have a whole new generation of entrepreneurs that may be quite disruptive to the older generation. But what I do want to caution people here about is the open questions about the fundamental profitability of being just a model company. Isn't it interesting that Microsoft has essentially outsourced the model, and that Google and Facebook has historically actually open sourced the model, and Facebook today is very aggressive about open sourcing that model. And so what we think of as actually the core AI technology, these large companies are actually, it's not internal, or they're handing it out for free. And what does that tell us about where the profitability is? It may not actually be in that part of the technology. If we go back to the internet and look at what are the most important technologies for the rise of the internet, I would put the three technologies as telecommunications, AT&T, Verizon. Second would be TCP/IP. Third would be HTML. How much money did those people make on the internet? Approximately nothing. And that's what we have to be careful about here, is that I think there are going to be portions of the value chain for AI that will not capture a lot of the profitability.
So if you had to guess right now, who's going to make the big money in this? Who stands to be the big winner?
So I think that the providers of the hardware technology used for this kind of technology are going to come out very strong. There's nobody in the world I prefer to be right now than Jensen Huang and NVIDIA. And on the other end of the stack, I do think that entrepreneurs building AI first applications will be in a great position, particularly as they're using and thinking about AI and reimagining how we traditionally think about applications. In terms of industry verticals where I think there is the biggest growth opportunity, the two areas I'm most excited about right now are video gaming and media or social media. And I think a lot of the conversation we're having today is focused on AI as a productivity tool. I think the better way to look at it is actually AI as enhancing consumption. And so what we are talking about here with generative AI is we now have the ability to provide infinite personalized content to any person to entertain them until the end of time. And so I think that's an area that is going to be very, very exciting.
So this is a super fast moving market. Presumably the rules of classic strategy still apply, but I'd love to know, does this feel different from new technologies that you've studied before?
Really, I like to think of this as a new type of computing platform. And so when I teach about technology, we teach students about the past in terms of the rise of operating systems and web browsers, and in terms of the current age, platform technologies like, metaverse, virtual reality, telecommunications enhancement through 5G, as well as a variety of other computing interfaces like voice. These are all platforms. This is a new kind of platform that allows us to do a much more human-like form of computing. And I would say that many observers in Silicon Valley, I think, were surprised by this type of ChatGPT model being the thing that really resonated with people. And that part, I'm still surprised by, but I think it speaks to the broader mission of artificial generative intelligence in terms of reaching sort of the singularity and sort of replicating the human. That really does speak to people.
In 700 meters, use the right 2 lanes to continue straight on 1, Ed Saw North.
Quite literally.
All right, so what's your basic message to senior leaders who want to lead their organizations into the future with a generative AI solution?
So for leaders that are trying to lead their organizations into the future, my core message would be you need to chill out and panic at the same time. And so when you're thinking about making investments in AI today, I want you to do it with a sense of urgency, but I don't want you to play for the next 2 years, you're playing for the next 10 years. Right now, it's a difficult time to make decisions around AI because at least my bet is we're almost certainly in the middle of a hype cycle around technology. And so in that sense, it's not really about the current phase of the technology, but without a doubt, in the next 10 years, advancements in computing and AI will continue to be transformative, and they will have transformative effects around the same logic that you and I have talked about today, and that the same assumptions about the importance of data, the same assumptions about fixed costs and variable costs, all that will be the same, and the more you can start getting your organizations ready now, then you'll be ready for the next transformation. Right now, there's a very specific set of technology that AI is based on. That will almost certainly be different in 5 to 10 years, and I want you to be ready for the next one. The broader competitive part, though, that's a little more frightening is that, in fact, other companies, your competitors, are almost certainly going through the same exercise. And so, really, we're on a treadmill here. And then, if you're looking at AI right now, you've really got to take some action because your competitors are also going to be doing the same kind of thing.
Where can companies go wrong? Are you seeing misunderstanding or misconceptions that can push executives in the wrong direction as they try to figure out how to respond to this technological opportunity?
There's two directions I would think about in terms of mistakes, and these are actually competing mistakes in that generally you make one or the other. And so the first mistake is being
In 300 meters. Use the right 2 lanes to continue straight on 1, EDSA North.
suspicious about the technology and suspicious about particularly privacy of data and restricting your employees from experimenting and using it. And in particular, over the next couple of years, we're going to see a large battery of new applications that are AI-based coming up. And the only way you're going to be able to figure out which of those applications is good and that you should diffuse the organization is by letting some frontline employees play around with that new technology. But that does entail the risk of letting your employees submit some data that's private to the company to those applications and into those models, right? So there's a little bit of intellectual property risk there, perhaps a lot. And the other risk here is the total opposite of that, is that companies need to really think about how they're protecting intellectual property, particularly on the open internet. We're in kind of a pickle right now for intellectual property in that we've lived through an era where
Continue straight on 1, EDSA North.
for, say, text-based information, that there's a distinction between copyrighted and non-copyrighted text. And what is different now is that it's not just about copyrighted or not, it's also about whether or not that information is available publicly.
In 700 meters. At the roundabout, take the first exit on 1, MacArthur Highway.
Publicly or privately. So, for example, a New York Times article would be copyrighted but public, in that Google can index it through its search process and find it online. That is the data that is going to be used to train the next generation of models. And that's data that I think companies like the New York Times and elsewhere really need to think about actually blocking off from the open internet so that they can retain the ability to use it, sell that data, or to train their own models with it, as opposed to letting everybody train their models.
In 300 meters. At the roundabout, take the first exit.
So that's such a great point, and I think for people who generate content, it feels like the generative AI bots have already scraped our information without our permission, and that's part of this great
At the roundabout, take the first exit on 1, MacArthur Highway.
aggregation of language and data that's being used, to generate these kind of amazing new things. It seems like an IP question that at best is a gray area and at worst is actionable.
Right, it's definitely a gray area right now. There's a number of ongoing lawsuits, and a lot of legal scholars have been really debating exactly what we should do here. Some have argued that we need to have more stringent protections to prevent people from training AI on some other person's copyright data. And if we don't make any change, then we are
In 1.6 kilometers. Turn left on SMB driveway.
a tough situation that, like, companies will probably have to pull their data off or make it harder to access the general public, in which case our notion of an open internet is going to be much more challenged. The internet could be much less open than we would imagine in the past.
So with any of these big technological developments, there's sort of a split between techno-optimists and techno-pessimists. And they're usually the same arguments, that, well, this is going to improve efficiency and let us do new things and free up humans to do more creative things. The pessimists tend to be, well, yeah, 1 or 2 humans will be able to do creative things, but all the other humans will lose their jobs. Where do you come down in terms of optimism versus pessimism in terms of this technology?
Adi, that's a super tough question, but I guess I would probably come down to the pessimistic side right now in terms of the broader impacts. And again, I'm not of the opinion there's any real way to stop the current process that we're undergoing in society, but the pessimism from my perspective comes from what we've seen already with the digitization of society in the last 20 years. And on the productivity side, on the employment side, automation has already had a tremendous impact on at least the American workforce in terms of lost jobs in middle America and manufacturing. In the retailing sector, the broad transformation of brick and mortar e-commerce has also cost a lot of jobs as well in local communities. I'm actually more concerned about the transformation on the consumption side, how we spend our time outside of work, and I think that's actually where it's most dangerous. The analogy here would be if you look at the last 20 years, if you look at our young people, how much time they spend playing video games and on social media. And now we have the ability to, at low cost, generate unlimited video games and unlimited social media. And in that world, the thing I would worry about is not necessarily whether or not your kids or my kids or anyone's kids can find a job. It's really whether or not they would want to ever work a job. Like if you can for very low cost just sit there and live in the digital world of unlimited, perfectly personalized content, what's the point of doing anything else? And then we have to reckon with whether or not that's a world we want to live in.
Andy Wu, I want to thank you for joining us. Thank you for your insights.
Hey, thank you for having me.
That's Andy Wu, a professor at Harvard Business School. Before that, I spoke with Chris Young, head of strategy at Microsoft. This is the last episode in our series, How Generative AI Changes Everything. To listen to the other
In 300 meters. Turn left on SMB driveway.
episode on the impact on productivity, creativity, and organizational culture, you can find them in the HBR IdeaCast feed. And for more on this topic, check out HBR's latest big idea on how to implement this new technology responsibly. That's at hbr.org/tech. This episode was produced by Kurt Nickish. To get technical help from Rob Eckhart, our audio product manager is Ian Fox, and Hannah Bates is our audio production assistant. Special thanks to Marie Pope. Thank you for listening to How Generative AI Changes Everything, a special series of the HBR IdeaCast. I'm Adi Ignatius.
Do you want to go deeper on business strategy? I want to suggest HBR's new podcast.